we're suggesting that you don't do. But our goal today is to highlight tendencies that provide some useful context for you viewers, not to make definitive claims about all Gen Z consumers. Naturally then, you should avoid assumptions that all Gen Z align with these general trends, and use this information for broader strategic guidance. But with the housekeeping out of the way, we'll get on to some quick intros. My name is Tom, and I'm a Senior Trends Analyst at GWI based in London. And I'm joined today by my colleague Elise, a Trends Analyst also from our London office.
Hi everyone, thanks for joining us today. And now you know who we are, let's get into some details about GWI. So, with data representing nearly 3 billion people across 50 plus countries, GWI has become the go-to for agencies, brands and media companies that really want to get a better hand on their consumers. Now, for this specific presentation today, it helps to know a little bit about where the data comes from. To start with, there's a mix of data from GWI Core, which is our main flagship survey, GWI Zeitgeist, which is fielded monthly and gives us the flexibility to ask consumers the questions about the things that matter right now, and GWI Gaming, delving into the attitudes and interests of today's gamers. So now you know a bit about us, let's get into what you all came here to see, unmasking the real lives of young adults.
Yeah, thanks for that, Elise. So, as we've all probably experienced, it's easy to make assumptions about people in a certain age group. Each generation comes with its own set of stereotypes. We're going to delve into why these stereotypes about Gen Z don't necessarily hold up. So what you can see on the slide is how much more or less likely global Gen Zers do certain attributes compared to the average consumer. We've got a list together of things that people often associate with Gen Z based on wider research, social media posts and just general internet chatter, and taking a look to see what's fact versus fiction. Now, for context, there are some things that do seemingly hold up, like not drinking alcohol or having low purchasing power. And we can see they're 35% more likely than average to not drink alcohol, while they're 40% less likely than average to have high purchasing power.
Now, when you look at the stereotype of playing video games, outside of China and India, Gen Z are more likely to do this, but only by 9%. So even though this does hold up, it's not something that really sets Gen Z apart from the rest of the world. So the important thing to remember is that while there might be some truth behind stereotypes, it's rarely that clear cut.
And even then, global figures can only show us so much. Now we're continuing to look at where Gen Z stereotypes do and don't hold up in more detail by looking at market differences. We can see on the slides the markets where Gen Z consumers are the least and most likely to think altruistically, to not drink alcohol, play video games, and to care about the environment. Now, specifically looking at altruism, we've delved into this as a perceived characteristic of Gen Z and the term being woke or wokeness. However, we don't really like the term and we prefer to break this down into altruistic traits. So we looked at a few different data points to get a more rounded picture of what it means to think altruistically. So we looked at if they're interested in other cultures or countries, if they believe in equal rights, or if they think immigration is good for their country. And based on what you see and hear about this generation, you might assume they'd be more likely to do or believe in these things, but they're actually 3% less likely than the global average. And this really does depend on the market, and it's much more prevalent among Gen Z in Greece, that consumers are 16% more likely than average to think this way, compared to Japan, with the same group at 28% less likely than the average.
And there are cultural differences, and therefore differences in priorities market to market. When looking at Indonesia, this is predominantly a Muslim country, so it makes sense that Gen Z there are over twice as likely to not drink alcohol. Whereas in Poland, this isn't the case. So if you're an alcohol brand following trends at a global level, you'd be missing out on the opportunity to reach Gen Z in a market where teetotalism is far less common. Brands need to remember these cultural nuances when targeting Gen Z, as no two markets have the same values and preferences. But age itself can be just as foggy, and that's why we need to take life stage into account too. When looking at this, it's clear that they're growing up. We can see on the slide that there's been decreases in the number of singletons in this generation, as well as students and those living with parents, but there have been increases in Gen Z working full or part-time, becoming parents and getting married.
Yeah, and over time, events like the COVID pandemic have impacted their life plans. And this means for some that they were able to save some money faster while living at home. So making a leap from living with parents to living independently was more attainable. However, this is only really applicable for the older end of the Gen Z cohort, and there are differences between various age ranges within this group. So at the younger end of the spectrum, 16 to 21-year-olds are more likely to start dating in the next 6 months rather than getting married anytime soon, whereas the 22 to 26-year-olds are considering leaving their jobs and thinking about parenthood. And this means they'll be coming into contact with certain services and sectors for the first time. You can think of finance, mortgages, insurance, and even things like wedding planners. So for brands in these sectors, it's a reminder to drill down into life stages so they're reaching the right audience.
Definitely. And one thing that we know is a priority with Gen Z, but acknowledged across generations, is the importance of mental well-being. Typically, Gen Z are thought to be more prone to mental health issues, and generally this idea does hold up. Globally, Gen Z are the most likely of any generation to say they have a mental health condition, but they're the least comfortable talking about it. And when looking at the reasons behind this, many factors could be at play. For example, climate change, COVID, and the almost impossible home ownership market. But these are problems that affect everyone, so it's important for brands to get a sense of where mental health is more prevalent if they're to tweak their messaging appropriately. As the stat on the slide shows, mental health issues are more prevalent in the US, where Gen Z are over 3 times more likely to have a mental health condition than the average global consumer. Despite this, they're actually 12% less likely to feel comfortable talking about their mental health. It's important that brands recognise this and consider factoring into mental health campaigns when reaching US consumers. This is just one example, but it shows how important it is to leverage data if brands want to nail their authentic approach with Gen Z or any consumer segment.
Yeah, nice. So we've taken a look at who Gen Z are and their changing life stages. So let's move on to take a look at how they keep themselves entertained. And as we went over briefly earlier, gaming isn't really something that's distinct to Gen Z, but how they interact with games is. So they're a social group and they tend to play games online. What I really want to highlight is their tendency to play with people they don't know or people they've met while playing a game. And we can see on the slide that a huge 51% of Gen Z gamers have done this in the last month alone, showing how popular this really is, but also how adventurous Gen Z are when it comes to meeting people virtually. Something else that might surprise you is that when it comes to first dates, gaming is less likely to be a turn-off topic than things like sports or popular culture. So while Valentine's Day is now passed for many countries around the world, this could be something to keep in mind for gaming companies when they think about their ads and who they want to target. Again, it's really all about building an accurate profile of this generation.
So on the previous slide, we saw that a huge 81% of Gen Z parents have played games online in the last month. So even though they're getting older and taking on more responsibilities, gaming isn't taking a back seat. This is the case even among Gen Z parents. Gen Z with children are more likely to play games online than those without. The same group are also less likely to play games alone too, meaning that their kids could be picking up on their hobby and joining in. There's a lot that brands can do to engage with Gen Z gamers. For example, influencer partnerships, sponsorships, and in-game purchases are likely to hit the mark with them. But essentially, this is the same for any gamer. So what brands really need to take on board is the way that Gen Z engages with gaming.
But we are going to put the controller down and take a break from gaming to look at more general entertainment behaviours, and more specifically, what types of entertainment Gen Z like to watch. And we are going to start by setting the records straight. Gen Z are less likely to watch shorter online videos than the average population, but this doesn't mean that rapid-fire content isn't hitting the mark with this generation. And we can see that on-demand streaming services, YouTube and TikTok are most popular among Gen Z, but more traditional viewing methods like live TV are more popular with older generations. And generally, apps like TikTok are known for their shorter form videos, so the fact that 70% of this generation outside China and India have used the platform in the last month, compared to just 30% of baby boomers, really speaks volumes.
Now, that previous point could be proven further by the fact that among Gen Z outside of China and India, TikTok use has grown by 43% since Q4 2020, while over 4 in 10 Instagram users watch or upload Instagram Reels every month. These figures show how prominent short-form videos are among Gen Z, and they have a clear preference for online formats, especially as YouTube is still more popular than any other video service that we track. But with the popularity of these videos and services have come some stereotypes. And what we need to address here is the preconception that all Gen Z have shorter attention spans to suit these short videos. Even though we've seen they do favour platforms that typically contain shorter videos, this doesn't mean that they don't have the attention span for longer form videos.
Yeah, and of course, this does vary a lot by market. And Gen Z in South Korea, Malaysia, and Taiwan are significantly more likely than the average consumer to watch long form videos. But on top of this, in markets where shorter videos are popular, like Greece, Hong Kong, and South Korea, Gen Z are more likely than average to be found watching longer videos too. So brands need to be aware of these preferences, and for them to continue to succeed with Gen Z, repackaging content into these smaller bite-sized videos will hit the mark with them. It's now about the format of the video, and it's not necessarily about the length.
Thanks, Tom. Some really interesting points that you've raised there. So now that we've dispelled some demographic assumptions and taken a look through entertainment, let's check in on Gen Z's lifestyle and see what trends are emerging. So it's worth just reinforcing a point that we've made throughout this webinar so far, that we shouldn't treat all Gen Z the same, but embrace the diversity within this generation. Only by looking at the bigger picture can we help brands to meet their demands, and with lifestyles, we can do so by looking at the underlying drivers behind both their healthy and unhealthy consumption habits. With Gen Z negotiating the transition into adulthood, they're embracing the experience of their newfound freedom. With this comes a balancing act between the unhealthy habits that you might associate with Gen Z and the good habits they weigh them up against, giving us a 360-degree view of their behaviour. Now, you might have heard about the popularity of vaping among young adults and the debate around it. We've had a closer look and found that in 5 European markets, Gen Z is the least likely generation to smoke cigarettes or tobacco products, which you might put down to health motivations. The reality is they're less likely than average to say they're health conscious, and rather than avoiding smoking altogether, they've taken to vaping, with over 1 in 4 Gen Z saying that they do.
Yeah, that's right. And this is where we can look at their other behaviours to try and frame this reality. So again, look at these 5 markets. Gen Z vapers are more likely than average to regularly drink alcohol, eat fast food, and think social media is good for society. Also be interested in gambling. So they're social drinkers who like being online, being active, and following sports. So for all their unhealthy habits, their view on health might differ from what you assume. So the logic here is that if this group is more likely than average to play football or soccer and go to online fitness classes, they think they can probably get away with vaping.
So then we could take a look at the view that Gen Z are addicted to their phones, which there is some truth to. They spend the most time on their phone out of any generation, an average of 4.5 hours a day, with over 1 in 4 scrolling for at least 6 hours. We're not here to dispute that it's a lot of screen time, but even these heavy mobile users still have a health focus, not physical, but financial. These users are more likely than the average Gen Z to say that they're price conscious, that they save as much money as they want to each month, and that being financially secure is important to them. So when times get tough, they'll be the first to cut back on unnecessary spending.
Yeah, and of course, these are just 2 examples that we feel are fairly prominent, but they highlight how easy it is to make assumptions about Gen Z's behaviour, but outdated to think their actions aren't well thought through. Because consumers' lives are a constant balancing act, and while it is easy to do, brands need to move away from preconceived ideas about how Gen Z behave. So, we've touched on how Gen Z are growing up, and that there's an increasing number now in part and full-time employment. And this comes at an interesting juncture for the workplace, as with a new generation of workers comes new expectations, but exciting opportunities that digital natives are well positioned to explore. So with AI taking the world by storm in 2023, it's no secret that consumers have been seeing the potential in this technology, with some fears around what this may mean. For Gen Z, it's much easier to communicate the positives. They're more likely to be interested in AI overall, supportive when using it for creative projects, and even agree that the technology should be used without legal concerns.